Thank you so much for organizing, for inviting me. This isn't my first rodeo here at Digital Dragons. I've been here since like 2016, visited a bunch of times. So yeah, it's great to be here one more time. Before we start, I just want to do like a quick survey about how many years you are in the gaming industry. Like less than 4 years, please raise your hand. Cool, awesome. Yeah, new wave, that's great. 4, 5, 6 years, around that time. Awesome. Come on, you're more than that. Indie for 6 years. That's great. And then, so 7, 8, 9. All right. And then 10 plus. Cool. Okay, that's great. The reason I'm asking, because this is the example of user research, but also the things that I'm going to be talking about resonate kind of differently with different people. And I'm going to be really curious to talk with some of you folks with different, years of experience to get what you are getting from these talks and these conversations. So to do like a quick intro, hi, I'm Arvy. I'm a lead UI UX designer currently working with Raw Power Games. I've been in game dev since 2013, and for some reason the layout is all messed up. Here you go, game development, that's great. A quick timeline, I started way back in 2013. I started at the outsourcing company called Spirisoft, not the one in Krakow, the other location. And I was really fortunate enough to start in the industry when the clients for the team that I was in were BioWare and Riot Games briefly. And it was a really great experience, really energizing experience for me, especially as a fan of BioWare games coming into this. 2015, I switched into mobile, mainly because I wanted to go into, proper in-house game production. I wanted to actually make games and not just, services or just little parts here and there. And there was the whole journey in the mobile industry. But as a sort of PC and console gamer at heart, I really wanted to, convert into like a different part of the industry, making games that I really, like to play, really understand. And this is how I got into Frontier. Thanks, Seb, here, my former lead. Did a couple projects there, spent some time over there, and in 2023, I joined a newly established Danish company called Raw Power Games. And in the meantime, I was also helping a bunch of indie teams, smaller teams, bigger teams, stuff like that. Some of the projects I worked on include Warhammer Realms of Ruin and Warhammer Rogue Traders, like the latest releases, but a bunch of these smaller, bigger titles, everything in between, you name it. While preparing this talk, I was thinking about my experience, and I was reflecting on this stuff that I did throughout the years. And I've been doing everything, essentially, like marketing, mobile games, AAA titles, indies, workshops, pitching, you name it. Like the spectrum is really wide, and I didn't want to concentrate just on giving you guys just some practical advice on what is the best, font for a certain situation, what colors should the buttons be, or what are the best layouts, or stuff like that. I feel like there's plenty of resources online that you can find quite easily, and they're great resources, they're amazing. But what I wanted to concentrate it, I preparing this talk, I was thinking about what moved me and what kind of philosophy, what kind of ideas were developing within me throughout these 10 years. But ultimately, I'm just a guy, right? I've been doing this for 10 years, but like, what can I talk about really, right? Because my experiences evidently should be shared with a lot of different people. And so while preparing this talk, I was creating a mirror board, as you usually do, and I started, just brainstorming a bunch of ideas and ended up with like 22 different topics that I could do like a whole lecture about on every single one. I'm blurring them because I'm not going to be able to cover all of them, and I also don't want to spoil some of the things in topics, but to sort of filter the main things, these are some of the things I would like to talk about today. A universal immovable truth, the importance of process, developing personal brand, and methods of creativity are sort of the main points. And universal immovable truths is a sort of the prelude to all of these. Sounds fancy, but the thing is, people want to get easy answers, quick answers, simple answers to their problems. Like, how do you do the best UX? How do you do the correct UX? How do you do something right? What's the best type of UI? What is bad UI? What is objectively good UI? And there's like this notion of these concepts being like universal, immovable, and changeable. Like back in the 70s, they got how UX is made good, and now it cannot be better and stuff like that. This is not how it works. I don't feel like universal immovable truths exists, because whatever best practices we had at the time, with the changing context, with the changing circumstances, changing player tastes, changing everything, technology, economical status, everything, the ideas and concepts evolve as well. And so what I like to introduce instead of universal immovable truth is what I like to pretentiously call dialectical method. What do I mean by that? I feel like everything is a process, and I feel like every process is driven by internal contradictions. Sounds super pretentious, I know. I'll try to explain it in simpler terms. Think about anything. Let's concentrate on trends in UI, for example. These are collections of UI screens from way back when, 90s, early 2000s, all over the place, different genres, different years, different gameplay concepts. And you can see that there are certain shared traits, shared qualities in how UI is presented. You see a lot of skeuomorphism, a lot of texturing, a lot of weird layouts and stuff like that. But then when we started to move further into the 8th generation of consoles, like late 7th gen, 8th gen, and moving forward, we started to get a lot more knowledge about the UX, and we started to get much more slicker and sophisticated with a lot of designs. And so for like almost a decade, like minimalism was kind of trendy. In various different sort of ways it became trendy, in especially in AAA space. But the thing is, the more the trends exist, the more they persist, the more we have this notion of, yeah, we're kind of getting tired, the audience getting tired of them, the creatives who are making these things are getting tired of them. And so now, if you look at some of the recent games from various different categories, there's like Baldur's Gate 3, who invokes some of the things that were done in early 2000s and 90s. You have indie games like Neo and Demon up there on the left, who reference Y2K stuff, whatever the hell Cruelty Squad was doing with their UI. But it's also great experimental, and it's kind of in response to what came before. So where's contradiction, right? The contradiction lies in that the more we're existing within this trend, the more we kind of want to get more of it, and at the same time, the more we get tired of it, as audiences and as creatives. So this is just one example of how I treat like all of the concepts that I'm going to talk about afterwards. So everything is a process, everything goes through an evolution, and this evolution is driven by internal contradictions. And this is how I want to frame all the topics that I'm going to talk about later. How I thought about them 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and how I'm kind of thinking about them now. And we're going to start with the process, like process in a pipeline sense, right? In the production sense. This is still a UI UX talk, right? I'm not going to be talking about production in great detail, but I wanted to concentrate on this topic and how process itself helps us battle uncertainty and battle entropy. There was a great talk by Jason Hickey earlier today that goes into much more detail about the specific aspects. And I wanted to talk about how it impacted me philosophically, right? And so 10 years ago, when I started working at Sperasoft, I was coming from the freelancer background. I was doing web design. I was doing, odd jobs here and there, some website here, some print design there. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't. But the thing is, coming into Sperasoft, I was acquainted with things like agile development, with Jiras, with teamwork and dependencies and all these wonderful things. And what I kind of realized by getting into this environment is that there are all these different questions that these processes help answer. Because at every stage of the way, we're always asking ourselves, like, what is our target audience? What are the expectations? Where do we start? What is our data structure? How are we going to shape the buttons? What is the specific layout for this specific screen? And, these questions are inescapable. At different stages, they're kind of different, but they're still present. We are shaping the game out of nothingness. And to combat this nothingness, for one, we need to ask these questions, and then we need to answer them. And so this is where entropy comes into play. The way I understand entropy in this context is that we have all these questions, and then we have the almost infinite number of answers that could fit these questions, right? What's our target audience? Well, it's up to us to decide based on, I don't know, market analysis or just pure vibes, we can decide ourselves. What is the button color? Well, we should design a system maybe and address it, but there are cultural things that kind of impact us. We can go wild. We can go and say, red is a progression color or acceptance color in a game. And these are the answers that we need to figure out and pick. And in order to do that more efficiently, we need the process. We need some sort of structure in place that helps us move through this uncertainty to pick a certain direction. And this is one of the most simplest, processes, framework that you could pick. PDCA cycle is, I feel works great in explaining, in simplest terms, how do you go through each and every cycle of development. You plan, meaning you try to think of an idea, or you're asking the question. You prototype, you test, you do some simple iterations, you check the feedback, you get the impressions of the players or stakeholders or whatever, and then you implement, and you go on the next iteration, and then it goes like a spiral. And it was great to come from the very chaotic environment of web design and freelance and being essentially a sole worker, right? Into this team environment and structure and stuff. And this is where I did some of the earliest work that I did in the industry at all. This was done for Dragon Age Keep. This was and still is actually a service that helped players create the save games that they could import in then new Dragon Age Inquisition, right? Because there were various different decisions that the players could make in Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2, and they impacted how Dragon Age Inquisition went. And so I did some designs for the actual application, and also had a chance to throw around my graphic design muscle and do some illustrations for the tiles. These are the choices that the players could have made. And it was great. It was a great project. It was very enlightening. It was great to be in the process working with the art director that was 10 hours ahead of me in terms of time zones. And it was great to just be there in the moment. But at the same time, that's the weird thing, right? That's the contradiction part coming. At some point, it was super clear what to do. Every tile had, a specific set of requirements. We had the process nailed down. It was we're after a couple of months, we were just going through the motions in terms of producing content and just making it further and further and further and more and more and more of it. And this was the point in place where the process kind of eroded the creativity part that was super important for me personally, right? When I was coming from the chaotic environment, I was doing anything and everything, and now this was all super set. This was this is how we do things here, this is how we do this things on this stage, this is where we test it, this is blah, 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 blah. And it was getting a little bit predictable, a little bit monotonous. There wasn't enough of the entropy that could spark the, the creativity or whatever. And so I switched jobs. And not only because of that, of course, because of various different circumstances, and Sparrowsoft was a great place to work at, but like I mentioned before, I wanted to get into proper in-house development and work on a real project from the beginning to end, and not just service on the side. And next workplace, next project was super chaotic, no processes in place at all. And this was a great contrast and a great sort of learning exercise for me. I remember back in 2015, I think it was August or something, our game director for the project at the new place where I was in, and also CEO, coincidentally, he said to me, 2 months and we ship it. This was a very small project. There was just 3 people, myself included. I was the only person responsible for all things 2D. He's 2 months and we ship it. This was a super simple project. 5 years, 3 platform switches, and 1 team replacement later, the game didn't come out. The funniest part was that when I was quitting the company, I had a chat with a producer from an alternate team, and he was like, let's have a chat. Can I suggest you stay? I'm like, there's no, I'm going away. He's like, no, listen, we have this other project, 2 months, and we ship it. I'm like, no. This was an experience. This was very interesting, actually, because I learned quite a lot during this period. I learned a lot about working under pressure. I learned a lot about working under very tight deadlines and uncertain circumstances, because, as I mentioned, 3 platform switches, right? We started as a mobile game, then we converted into a Facebook Messenger game. There was Facebook Messenger exclusive games, believe it or not, for 3 months. Then we wanted to be a game for smart TVs based on Android. Then we started to be an arcade title for consoles. And this was I learned a lot about UX for various different platforms, so that was a plus. But at the same time, we didn't know when the switch is going to come. We didn't know what exactly is going to be our trajectory once we kind of settle on a specific set of processes or a specific set of concepts, right? So yeah, that was wild. And the thing is, the lack of structure doesn't mean that there's not going to be structure throughout all this time. It's going to mean that processes are going to fill the void, and most of the time they're going to be based on miscommunication, lack of clear goals, lack of shared knowledge and shared goals among the team. And so the topic of my talk also contains mistakes, and so this is one of the mistakes that was kind of felt throughout this whole production. So this is one of the screens at one of the stages of the game. I don't remember what was the stage specifically, but the thing is, I was making all of these iterations in high fidelity, trying to search for a specific way we could show stats, right? And that's the thing. The time for iteration was 2 weeks, and I had to churn out all these mock-ups, and I was experimenting with little details. I was focusing too much on if I place it here specifically, will it benefit us? Without actually, if you look at them, it's spot the difference, right? They're not that different from each other. So one of the ways that could have been improved is if we take a step back and say, okay, what are we actually trying to achieve? What is the problem, right? And what are the potential different solutions, meaningfully different solutions that we can offer to this problem? And this is the work of the designer, right? Trying to come up with these solutions and also basing on the actual data, right? Why do I think and how can I prove that this is the direction that we can make? This is just, scattershot approach willy-nilly. It was okay. It looks fine. I still like how it looks, and I feel like the team did a really great job, but yeah, it went nowhere, unfortunately. So yeah, 10 years ago, I was first exposed to the notion of processes in teamwork, and it was great. It was very enlightening, but at the same time, I found some things lacking. After that, I was in an environment which was absolutely inverted, purely contrasting with what I had before, and had my share of experiences there. Now, I feel like, based on all the prior experiences, I feel like the best processes are fueled by data and communication. And what I mean by that is that we need to be able to ask and answer the questions that you're seeing right now. Like, how do I know that? We need to do X, Y, and Z. How do I know that, right? Or where did I get that from? Did we agree on this? Is there enough communication that is shared between team members that say, okay, yeah, we know how we got to this point? Or what is the source of this? Did we do enough tests for feature A, feature B, feature C, and so on and so forth? So I feel like this was incredibly valuable. This is something that I carry on into my other projects and other teams. Somewhere around that time, yeah, because of the 2 months turning into 5 years, I had to go into therapy because this was awful. I got to, somewhere within this time frame, I got to the notion of not marrying to your work. And I'm saying work instead of job, although it's important not to marry to your job as well. But when I'm saying don't marry to your work, what I mean is that not everything has to be 110% magnum opus, final level of fidelity and stuff like that. And when I was much younger, much earlier in my career, I wanted to go 120%, 150%. Like, oh, I got this task, and instead of taking a step back, asking questions, talking to the people in the design team, I was like, yeah, I can design on the fly. I can do these things, these beautiful pieces of art, or these beautiful, wonderful layouts and concepts. And this was too much too soon in the development cycle. And this is the model that I really liked. I just found the random scientific paper from 20 years ago about importance of modeling in science education. And I really like the notion of complexity that is being increased on every step of the way. And I feel like this is how I view the model of making a game itself. At least I feel like this is a valid interpretation. You have game design team, programming team, UI UX team, but there are all these other audio team, art team, these are all these different teams. And imagine that they are creating, they're moving to this most complex version of a thing in the end, which is the game. And at every stage, the thing that we're doing is less complex than the final thing, right? Stage one, we're doing something simple. We're sharing between each other. We're sharing with, communication, documentation, all these things. We're doing something simple, and then we're moving forwards. We're agreeing with gates and proper kickoffs and stuff like that. And we're moving forward, and we're building complexity towards the finished product. And the thing is that, so like one of the examples from my previous work on Jurassic World Evolution 2, you can see how it's reflected in the journey of the screen, right? This is the UI for the main menu, and you can see the earliest level of complexity, which is a gray box, sort of wireframey approach, but then it gets enriched with during production with various different pieces of art, and also audio, and also input, and also it has to be properly hooked up to the data, and so on and so forth. It has to be localized. We have to test various different platforms and how icons work, and yada, yada, yada. So you can see that the complexity increases, and with it, the amount of people who are involved in crafting this product also increases. Another example from the frontier years, you can see, like, back then, this was like the starting point for the HUD, right? For the strategy game, Realms of Ruin, and how like we kind of we marked the basics, and this was created in order to convey the idea. Okay, this is where the minimap is going to be. This is how we're going to select units. This is like the amount of resources. We didn't know, but we were kind of hypothesizing and conceptualizing and sharing ideas. So this is the way of communicating with the team. Hey, is this it? The team says, yes, this is it. The team then proposed something to build on top of it, so on and so forth. You go through various different stages of fidelity to the end. And the end result, it's beautiful, it's amazing, and it has a lot of work from a lot of different people, a lot of shared ownership, right? And a lot of effort. But there's a downside to that as well. Because throughout sort of this process, I personally felt like I'm starting to lose a little bit of input, a little bit of meaningful input, because what I'm doing is impactful, of course, on the shape of the final product, but at the same time, here's the contradiction, right? Because of so many different owners, because of so many different parties involved in all of this process, I cannot say that I did all of this. Of course not. And it's a great thing. It's a team effort. But there's also ownership that is being eroded a little bit by bit, throughout all of this process. And it's fine. It's not a reasonable way to say, to strive to become a bottleneck and be responsible for all the different things in your game. This is not how games are made. But the thing is, psychological effects are still there. These were the feelings that I was kind of going through. These were the emotions that I was experiencing, and I need to address them in some way. But also, there's detachment that is present because of the economical circumstances as well. Like when, and this is something that I'm going to address later on, when you don't feel possession of the work, when you don't feel like you're meaningfully impacting the work itself, it starts to become like my head was filled with questions like, why am I doing this exactly? Like, what's the point? I'm not going to be, the ownership of the IP because it's someone else's IP. I'm not going to be the owner of the game itself, right? I cannot distribute the game. I cannot, repackage it or mod it a lot of the times, right? This isn't really my game. Like ultimately, what I'm getting is the line in the CV and maybe a nice piece in the portfolio, but that's pretty much it, right? And so you can see how the circumstances of the industry sort of pushed me into being, well, kind of aloof, kind of whatever. But also, I was trying to see what I can do about this. And throughout the recent, I would say 4 or 5 years, right, I started to try to do something about this. I started to try to get into personal projects and also the development of personal brand, so to speak. I'm not a fan of the brand, right? Because it reminds me of cattle branding, the stuff that they like burn on the cow's butt. How I like to think of it is the way of building connections. It was important for me to be able to say, hey, I really like your work. You're a cool person. Let's meet, let's talk, let's discuss something. And for them to be able to say, hey, I know your work as well. You're a cool person. Let's hang out. Let's meet. Let's do something together. Maybe let's collaborate. While preparing for this talk, I stumbled upon the interview with Brian Eno, musician, and some of the work that addressed the things that he talked about. And he talked about the notion of a lone genius and how it's actually pretty harmful for us to think about Picasso's or Einstein's or Mary Shelley or whatever as soul things that came out of, geniuses that came out of ether, out of nowhere, and created the beautiful stuff that we all admire, and then they vanished and that's it. What Brian Eno proposes, and what I really like, is the notion of a scenius, right? These people exist within a community. These people exist within a scene of people who collaborated with each other, who stole with each other, from each other, who based their works on each other, or supported them in some way, or did various different things, just thrown ideas around. And this is how they propped up each other. And yeah, some of the people were recorded much more prominently in history, but this doesn't change the fact that the people around them also existed. I want to share, so this is one of the personal projects that I started making around 2019 to sort of fill out my portfolio, because obviously everything else was either NDA'd or not developed properly, not released at all. And this is how I started doing this, my shtick, right? I take some of the ideas that came into earlier games, like in older games and stuff, and as I'm trying to think about redesigning them in like modern context, and I'm trying to, this is the place where I'm trying to put like 110%, 120%, and do a lot more. And this is the piece that got me hired at Frontier, by the way. But the interesting thing is, and this is where the sceniest part comes in, back in 2015, I stumbled upon a fan project by Howard Day and on the Polycount forums, of all things. And he did what you see in the background, right? The very low poly sort of 3D kind of environment inspired by Star Wars. And I was like, hey, let me do you're doing it as a game project. Let me just contribute with some UI to that. And UI was very simplistic. This was like, yeah, no. But like looking at it, I'm like, yeah, 5 years before I had started developing my personal portfolio in that way, I was already working on something similar. In fact, like some of the color shades, especially like in cyan and green and yellow, were kind of similar to that. And it's like, oh yeah, that's an interesting connection. I was influenced by the scene. I was influenced by the Star Wars brand. I was influenced by all these different things. And this is how I wanted to, go forward with developing my portfolio. And, I'm doing various different projects, both fan art and original and various different mediums. I like to collaborate with people a lot as well, with various different artists, with musicians and animators and whatnot. And I feel like this is incredibly productive in starting to get independence a little bit from these workplaces that might not be ideal for you as a creative outlet. Not all workplaces like this, but when they are, it's important to get the outlet for your creativity. And in fact, creativity is something that I would like to talk about next. But before that, I'm going to take a sip of water. Hopefully you're not bored, guys. Cool. So, the method of creativity. 10 years ago, I was really influenced and really exposed and really influenced by this documentary, like amateur documentary on YouTube, which was called "Everything Is a Remix." And the thesis of this documentary was that the basis of creativity is this. Like these three actions: we copy, we transform, and we combine stuff that we copied from elsewhere. I really, really appreciate the influence of this documentary on me. However, rewatching it, I realized that you have to take it with a grain of salt because they're not referencing a lot of credible sources in this. So this is like an interesting concept, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but it's important to be conscious that, okay, this might not necessarily be the universally movable truth. But the thing is, it was really important, especially early on, to create the basis for my the development of my creative muscle. I showed you the Star Wars fan art project, and this is like some of the process behind it, how I usually try to approach these things. And whether it's a personal project or whether it's a commercial project, I really like to try to be meticulous and really like to try to get these sort of basic building blocks in place early on and think about them visually. So this is like a snapshot of my mirror board and some of like close-ups of things that I was thinking about when I was making that project. I was thinking about 70s typography and iconography. Why 70s? Because Star Wars came out in 70s. Like, how can we connect these dots? And then of course, I'm looking at various different existing Star Wars properties in games. And then I'm kind of looking, here are the primary colors. It's kind of washed out, I think. But the idea is that there were primary colors usually used in Star Wars projects, like the blues and reds, mostly blues. But then there was like, oh, Knights of the Old Republic 2 used a lot of secondary colors, and this kind of stands out, and how can we use that? But then we're looking, of course, at the movies, and you have the classic trilogy, but then in cinematography for The Mandalorian and The Last Jedi, for example, there were a lot of these hue shifts, especially in shadows, that turned greenish instead of bluish and stuff like that. So you could pick all of these inspirations and try to remix them in an interesting way and try to apply to your project. I actually talk about this in more detail. There's a video on YouTube that I made in conjunction with Discord channel, Discord community, We Can Fix It in UI. I really encourage you to join We Can Fix It in UI everywhere. They're a great bunch of folks, industry UI UX people. I hang around there a lot as well. If you approach every creative task with just this copy, transform, combine, there is a significant chance of ending up just plagiarizing something, right? You might not transform enough, you might not combine enough, you might copy a shit idea, or you might copy something super popular, and so it's going to look very vanilla, very default as a result. So you have to take your time and think about what exactly you're trying to achieve, and not just accept the first ideas that come to your mind. This is the Disney creative strategy concept that I really admire. This is the concept for like general creative process in Disney, but also it applies for various different stages of brainstorming. You have roughly 3 stages in which, if you're doing a collective exercise, but even if you're on your own, you can apply this to yourself. At this stage, you dream, you just do whatever. I want to, I don't know, Martian cow, paramilitary socialists, go. And you know, this is like the pure, unfiltered sort of ideation, right? This is the stage where you don't criticize, when you don't try to assess, you're leaving your rational part of your brain elsewhere, and you're saying, okay, these are just the ideas. Of course, you might need to have a goal that you're going to. I need to create a personal project for my portfolio. Okay, what's going to be the theme? What's going to be the topic? What's going to be the message? Blah, 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 blah. So this is the stage for ideation. Then the next stage is for defining the criteria. So we're taking some of the ideas that we kind of gravitate towards, vibe with more at the first stage, and then in stage 2, we kind of apply criteria. How much is it going to cost? What do we need to actually achieve them? Who's going to be involved, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this is not about criticizing. That's a very important thing to note. This is about just assessing them objectively, putting data on your dreams. And then in the end, after you have some more formalized proposals, you go into the criticism mode. This is where you say, okay, yeah, we cannot really do that because we don't have enough money. We cannot really do this because this is, I know, culturally insensitive. We cannot really do this because of such and such ideas. And of course, this is a cycle also that you can repeat on various different stages of development. Again, remembering the scheme from before. And in the end, you have a product, hopefully. But also, so I talked about like the notion of not jumping to the first ideas and going through this process early on. But then what I really like is the notion of like creative negative space, right? I mentioned that one of the first ideas that you're going to jump to are going to be super mainstream, vanilla, like everyone is doing this, and so you're just going to be copying stuff from everyone else. The second best idea is also going to be pretty, like, maybe a little bit more specific, but still quite close to mainstream. And you need to find a really nice balance between being way too out there and way too vanilla, right? And trying to find this, like, crack in between, which I like to call, like, a creative negative space. This is the example from a website called Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute. But it's a lovely site, an amazing piece of work, piece of community work that lists various different aesthetics and names them, and you can look at them and like, oh yeah, I kind of know what this is, and this is actually what is this? Sport Brute? I didn't. Okay, Neo Vector Heart, for example. You know that there are certain qualities of certain different aesthetics, and you're like, okay, they're kind of loosely defined. Here's where you can put the name on them, and here's what you can say, oh, I need to actually combine this and this, and then this and this, or I like the lettering from here or stuff from there, etc., etc. I feel like it's super important to become a sponge, right, at various different stages of creativity. Yeah, this is going to be the next one. It's super important to become a sponge. It's super important to be very receptive to various different notions and trends, and read books, be very involved in, I don't know, aviation, be very involved in movie production, etc., etc. Try to submerge yourself in various different facets of human activity. And this is going to be not just for aesthetics, but also for developing your empathy and understanding of how humans work. Because ultimately, this whole thing is for the human on the other end of the screen. And so to structure the process, and this is where we're circling back to the process thing, I really appreciate, like, out of all of these sort of stages, sort of develop the lo-fi, mid-fi, hi-fi approach, all right? Lo-fi, mid-fi, hi-fi, meaning the fidelity level. And why is it important? It's important to be able to define the stages at which you can communicate effectively, right? And you can iterate effectively without costs and without like it being way too expensive, way too heavy to even comprehend and stuff. So yeah, low fidelity stage. This is like the napkin sketch. This is your whiteboard sketch. This is the write up in Confluence, a Miro board, something super simple. Yeah, one of the things that I like to do. This is my favorite meme. Just do notes. Just talk about things at the highest level, not go into too much detail. And this is the place where we talk with the team a lot. We agree or disagree on the concepts, but go through all these different stages of brainstorming and agreeing and disagreeing, blah, 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 blah. So low cost of iteration and low cost of ideation, right? The knock-on effect of the things that we're going to lock on at this stage is going to be pretty significant, but not impossible to recover from if we decide to go back to this stage at any point. Yeah, by the way, I'm not affiliated with Fool's Theory and the Witcher remake that they're making. This was a pure coincidence that I did like a Witcher reimagining some time ago. But yeah, this is like the example of the mid-fi approach. Like at this stage, you just kit bash stuff together. If you'd like, you do something primitive. You try to like loosely define the ideas that you like to put here. It's not super fancy, but it's there to concretize the low fidelity stage and make it a little bit more specific. Like theoretically speaking, with a little bit of polish, it could be shipped, right? I'm stretching the definition of little bit, but you know what I mean. And then the high fidelity stage are the finals. You can see that like the fidelity of render differs, the fidelity of all these things, and this is where you're putting the final touches on the actual thing. And yeah, hopefully it comes out all right. But it's very important to be mindful of the journey. How do you get to high fidelity? And one of the things that I learned at Frontier, we're working on Realms of Ruin, was that, especially working with external stakeholders like Games Workshop, we wanted to sort of decouple our design process, decouple this iteration process and the things that we changed and threw out and cut from the actual approval process. And this was super important for us. But at the same time, we had to know how our game is going to look in the final stage. And so a lot of the game was implemented and done in mid-fidelity to then be reskinned into high-fidelity so that we cut in cost there, and we were approving high-fidelity stuff sort of in parallel to all of that here. Yeah, I was about to talk about some conclusions, but I guess it all comes back to the dialectical method for me personally, right? This journey, I haven't covered all of the topics that I wanted to talk about, of course, but this journey sort of helped me think about the ways we can concretize various different elements of development, and how can we think about various different concepts in very fluid and flexible terms that are still meaningful, right? They're not like, oh, it can be this and can be that, it can be whatever. No, it can mean very specific things, but we need to define how we approach them and how we think about them. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and attention. And yeah, thanks. Any questions?
If you have any questions, please step up to the microphone in the middle of the room.
Hi, hello, thank you for the talk. I'm actually a writer, but I think as writer can learn a lot from you user experience designers, especially the writers that specialize in narrative design. And I really like the part where you showed us the same product, but with a lot of small changes, like you couldn't decide which one. And this is a problem that us writers often have. So I was wondering, how do you have like process to design which is the final version, maybe some advice, or how do you approach this moment when there's a lot of ideas and you can't decide on the final one?
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you. I feel like what helps here is the existence of core pillars, like something that you need to agree upon early on throughout, again, the process of ideation and brainstorming and all of these things. You have to agree on core pillars, the pillars of the project that you need to refer to when making a decision. For example, if you're like putting the final touches, you need to make sure to ask yourself, do they correlate or they contrast with the core pillars that we agreed, the core values of the project that we agreed upon? Like if we say, I don't know, our game is very mature, very hardcore, very dark. When putting the final touches, you wouldn't just start to put, flowers and bright colors everywhere. You might, right? This might be a direction that you would like to take, but then you need to ask yourself and ask, people in the team, is this really, does it really adheres to the core pillar that we established? Like we agree that this is going to be the direction. We can't change it, right? But then this is also something that might have huge knock-on effects, right? So we need to be careful about these things. So I feel like, referring to the core pillars is one of the ways to sort of prove that some of the things need to be done and some need to be filtered. Does this answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think no. Yeah, but
yep.
Yeah. In any case, I just wanted to say, please catch me afterwards. I'll be happy to chat. I'll also be happy to ask you questions about how did it go? Like, did you get something out of it? Because I'm a user experience guy. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's thank Arvydas once again with a round of applause.